record. And I will turn it over to you, Karen, for your introduction, and we'll get started.
Perfect. I do see one hand raised, and I just wondered if it might be something that was important before we even get going. Do we want to address that question? Yes. I think it's coming from, it looks like Hannah.
Yes, I'm Hannah. Sometimes all the captions, all the chats really interrupting with the PowerPoints and we can't see what's written. How can we ask people to maybe write the question, or maybe you can give few more minutes for questions or chat, because it's been interrupting even to the person that presented before. She couldn't see what she was presenting because the chats were long. So even now, you know, the chat is so long, it comes to your chin. So that,
on your screen, Hannah, you can close the chat completely.
Yeah, my son said he'll show me, but he left off to the other session.
If you are in the chat, you might see a little arrow or button to click on it to close it out. And then you won't have
There's
it on
X here, but I don't know if that's the one.
Or at the bottom, there's the controls, and it will say chat, and you can click on that and it will close it out.
Moved it to the side, so that's not what I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to leave the meeting for sure. I just close the chat again, but I don't want to take time from other people. It's just that it was so interrupting, and I don't know. People write and write and write. They're not thinking that it takes so much space. Maybe at the end you can leave more time for questions.
We will definitely have time for questions. I'll give you a little shout out.
I appreciate that you recognize that I raised hands.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, we've got more raised hands though. We need to make sure everybody's ready to go before I launch into things. So can we just, is it Uda? Am I reading that right? Let's just make sure people can.
Yes, this is Uda or Barta. I just wanted to let you know that, Hannah, that at the bottom of the page where the word chat is, when you see the little bubble for chat, you can go to the right of that. Just to the right of it is a little arrow in the bubble called chat. Click on that and you'll have option for unclicking showing chat previews. So that may be, it was hard to understand that instruction, but there's chat on the bottom of the page,
right?
And in that bigger bubble of chat, there's a little arrow to the right. If you click on it, it says show chat previews. Unclick that and you'll be able to stop the chat from coming onto your screen while people are talking.
Thank you very much. And Mabel, if you could put your question in the chat, we'll want to get started. So we have plenty of time at the end for those questions. And Karen, you want to go ahead and give us a little bit of background on you and your introduction to your presentation. Thank you.
Yes. Well, it's just wonderful to have so many people join us here. My name is Karen Roa. I'm a clinical psychologist working in Hamilton, Ontario. I work for an anxiety clinic at a hospital here in Hamilton, affiliated with McMaster University. And I always share when I'm talking to people in this important sort of sphere of my professional life that I became involved in wanting to know more and support people with difficulties with discarding and problematic acquiring many years ago, when we used to think that this was potentially a subtype of OCD. So I did a lot of work in OCD. And I always thought, I don't think I'm really helping that much. I think I need to learn more. Maybe we have a bit of this wrong. So spent the last about 15 years of my career trying to learn as much as possible about this topic so that I can better support people in my region. And then I love to be able to come and speak to people. Obviously, we're going much bigger than that for today. So today, my hope is that we're going to spend a little bit of time doing some discussion, but also some reflection on the topic of motivation and enhancing our readiness to make some of the changes that we might want to make that feel important for whatever your personal journey is. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, if it's possible, don't go out of your way to do this, but if you can, I would encourage that you might want to have a piece of paper and a pencil. Because I know what I'm going to ask. I'm going to be asking you some questions and some reflections. And I want people to kind of maybe jot some ideas and notes down just for yourself. This is hopefully going to be very experiential. And then lots of time for questions at the end, and we can sort of clarify certain things. I know, Patricia, I saw your note earlier saying, please speak slowly. And I thought, by my very nature, I'm a very fast speaker. So I will do my very best to keep it at a reasonable pace. But do remember, there is a recording. And you might want to watch me at 0.5 speed if my speed is a little bit too fast. Sometimes I get excited. So if people want to either grab that, or if you're very techie, I like paper and pencil, but if you're techie and you have an extra device where you have a notes page, that would also work. But I want people to be able to do some reflecting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk us through a little bit of information, a little bit of reflection, and then, like I said, have an exercise that's something that I'm going to encourage you to do, and then we're going to open it up and have a nice discussion as well. Okay. So I'm going to share slides for some of this so that I think it's some of us are visual learners. And so I'm just going to get a slideshow going. Liz, can you see that okay?
Yes, looks great.
Perfect. I just want to make sure that there's a good chance that we're going to be able to see this. Okay. Oh, I should also mention, just to let you know, that this, the information that I'm going to be sharing today is very much a reflection of some of the important kind of readings in the area. So you guys just saw Dr. Frost and Dr. Steketee, so they've been incredibly influential in all of the work that I do. And then also, I really have drawn from the experiences of people I've worked with. So I offer a cognitive behavioral therapy program for problematic acquiring and difficulty discarding, otherwise often known as problematic hoarding. And I do this up here in Hamilton in Canada. Okay, so the first thing that I want people to do is just take a moment and think of a particular change that's been important to you or that you've been mulling over that has to do with this difficulty. And it could be anything. Some people will say, I'm really looking to try to reduce the number of things that come in my home. So maybe they're trying to make a change of how often they go thrifting. Some people may be trying to make changes around freeing up some important space for having comfortable spots in their home to sleep and to sit and to eat. So sometimes we're trying to just get a nice portion of our bed that's available, on a regular basis so that we're comfortable. Maybe it's that you want to make a change with having some more open counter space or a clearer entryway, whatever it is for you. Just reflect for a moment on a change. And if you want to note that down, if you are going to kind of write along with paper and pencil, then I want you to look up and use this scale from 0 to 10 and ask yourself, how ready do I feel right now to make this change? And there's no right answer. It's just your personal reflection. Are you, on closer to that red end where it's like, ooh, I'm not feeling ready at all. I don't have the confidence. I don't know what I'm going to be able to do to make the change. Or are you, middle, or are you very high? You're actually either close or you've already started to experiment with trying to make that change. This is just a personal number. So jot that down. We'll keep this in mind as we go through things. And then my next question for everybody is motivation sometimes a challenge for you? And what I'd like to say about this is that if the answer is no, then you are superhuman, because we all struggle with motivation in anything in our lives. Even the most motivated, forward-thinking people with clear goals have struggles with motivation. So one of the most important things that we need to think about when we think about motivation and making changes is self-compassion. And I have a bunch of these tips. I call them pro tips. These are just sort of things that I think are important for us to think about as we move through trying to make changes in any important area in our lives. And it's very easy to get caught up in a lot of self-criticism. Many of us have probably been actually criticized by others. Why don't you just throw that out? Why don't you just stop that behavior? Why don't you just, make this big change? And so there are a lot of reasons why we may be struggling with self-compassion. And I think the most fundamental thing that we need to do is have a little bit of self-compassion, that making changes is hard for any human being about anything. The status quo is actually often the more comfortable place to be, even when it's a punishing, difficult, problematic status quo. So we want to start off with this sort of idea that in order to sustain as much reasonable motivation as possible and get the best chance to follow through on things that are important to us, we need to come to the table with a little bit of self-compassion and understand that this process is hard for all human beings. Motivation will wax and wane depending on what's going on in our lives. And our level of motivation and readiness will be different depending on different goals. We may feel very motivated and make some really important changes in one area of perhaps even this problem. And then we go to another area and we get a bit stuck. It feels harder, it feels more overwhelming, it feels more sentimental or emotional for us. And so we have to just sort of, I think, meet ourselves with self-compassion. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a few of the many, many things that could affect our level of motivation at any given point in time. And here are just a few of many things, and you probably will all be able to reflect on other things that might affect our motivation. The first one is that, as I mentioned, change is hard. So human beings do better with staying with the status quo than making a change. And so that's just sort of part of our biology and our wiring. And then there can be other things that really affect our motivation. So many people with difficulty with clutter or problematic acquiring, difficulty discarding, have had really difficult experiences in their lives, and maybe numerous difficult experiences with either parting with things and feeling regret or having difficulty with that, or maybe they've had really difficult experiences where other people have gotten involved and actually discarded or given away or thrown out things that were personally meaningful, or done that without your control. So prior difficult experiences like that are encoded in our brains in a very different way because they're very emotional and very upsetting. And so that can come in as we start to try to get motivated to, let's say, work on having a comfortable space to sleep in our home. We may be flooded with memories of prior difficult experiences where we felt out of control, where we felt like this was done to us rather than something that we were ready to do. And so those difficult experiences can make our motivation feel a little bit more challenging. I don't know if everyone has heard the term, Dr. Frost and Dr. Sekedy may have brought it up already, but this term of clutter blindness, like sometimes we just get used to our surroundings and we just don't see things that maybe other people would see. So if we're living amongst a lot of items that we've kept for many, many, many years, we may just not see them anymore. So part of our motivation might be that it's hard to see where the problem is. It's just our home or our living space or our car, wherever we might have sort of excessive amounts of clutter. And so sometimes it's that we just don't see it. And And the big one I think we can all relate to is making a big change and looking at sort of something that's probably a multi-step change or will require a lot of sustained effort, is feeling overwhelmed. It's really hard sometimes to know where to start, and we can feel easily overwhelmed, and not even, sort of get started or be able to kind of hold on to any motivation because we go to do something and it feels like it's too much. Another thing that can affect motivation is if we don't have anyone who's either able or willing to help us. Sometimes we could do many, things on our own, but sometimes we need a little bit of support, either physical or emotional, or maybe support in sort of organizing things and making good decisions, bouncing our ideas off of. And so if we don't have anyone that we really trust, or anyone who's willing to come and do a little bit of help with some of the processes, that can make it feel really hard, and our motivation might take a nosedive. Some of us might say, well, no one comes over anyway, so what's the point? Why am I going to put all this energy out if really, is it going to change much of anything? Is this really going to lead me anywhere different? We know that this difficulty with excessive acquisition, clutter, difficulty discarding, so this problem otherwise known as a hoarding difficulty, comes along with other mental health difficulties. So sometimes our motivation is sucked away from us because we're in a bit of a depression. We're struggling with low and depressed mood. This can be seasonal. Sometimes for people it's not, it's just there a lot. But one of the actual symptoms of depression is having low motivation and not being able to take kind of a lot of pleasure in things that we used to. And so that's a very real reason that we might struggle with motivation. Other mental health difficulties, like difficulties with anxiety. If we have a lot of anxiety, a lot of our mental energy and physical energy is going towards just kind of managing day-to-day tasks and doesn't leave a lot left over to sort of pull our resources and get motivated for other things. Life stressors can come up. So, we may have something going on in our families that's just really important. And so once again, that takes a bunch of energy. And so why am I bringing up all of these things? Once again, it's to really, I think, foster an attitude and a stance of self-compassion that, yes, there are many things that come into the equation that might affect our motivation. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can do to foster and channel kind of, energy and motivation, but I think we need to be really strategic about how we do that. Jana, I see your hand up, and I know we're recording this, so I just don't want to put you on the spot to ask questions, but I would love to know, just in case it's something about if you can't see something, or having any difficulty with hearing. Is it anything like that, or is it a question that we should maybe chat about down the road?
Can you add it to the chat?
Okay, I'll let you, and Liz, you let me know if it's something about what I'm doing that people are struggling with, and I'm happy to try and address that. Okay. And then we also want to think about the fact that there are some, barriers to change that we sometimes have to contend with. So let's think about some of those. And they really overlap a lot with some of the difficulties that do affect our motivation. And I'll invite you all to sort of, make a mental sort of tick mark of some of these things that we have to be aware of and work around when we're thinking about getting our motivation up to make important and meaningful changes. And one of them is energy. So all of us only have a finite amount of energy. And so we have to be strategic and reasonable about not overwhelming ourselves with trying to do too much when we don't have enough energy. So you still have to have energy for the rest of the important parts of your life, in addition to trying to work on something that it feels like it's an important challenge that you'd like to work on. So we have to think about energy. One of the things that Dr. Frost and Dr. Steketee write about, and we talk about in cognitive behavioral therapy, is sometimes some of the sort of the ways that we think that are problematic or that make us have more struggle when we try to approach a problem. And one is sort of overestimating our ability to make big changes quickly. So it's really, a lot of people with this difficulty have a lot of perfectionism or high perfectionistic standards. And so along with that comes this idea like, okay, I need to make a change. I've got a bit of motivation to make a change. So I'm going to make a huge change. I'm going to clean an entire room out in a weekend. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like it's too much. So we tend to overestimate and we go, really big. And then sometimes we get very overwhelmed. We don't know where to begin. We get physically exhausted. We get mentally exhausted. Discarding or making changes with patterns of acquiring is emotional work. So we're going to get emotional about it, and we have to be aware of that. And as I mentioned again, previous difficulties can come up and make it feel like, oh, I don't even want to go in that room. Never mind, try to do anything in that room. It just brings up bad memories. It brings up a feeling of being overwhelmed. It brings up difficult emotion. So we sort of back off again. And then lack of time or clutter blindness, as I mentioned. But the biggest thing that we need to reflect on and talk about is actually what I think is probably one of the core difficulties in this problem, which is using avoidance. So sometimes, if I want to be very plain spoken, I will sort of start with this idea that I think that hoarding difficulties are a problem of avoidance. Let me expand on that a little bit. So when I say that, what are we avoiding? Well, I think by avoiding going into a pattern where we might work on discarding things that are in taking up extra space, or that maybe we don't have the space for anymore, I think we're avoiding emotion and distress and guilt and sadness and shame and all sorts of really strong, important, difficult emotions. So I imagine, for a variety of very good reasons, that would be a whole other talk, that people, when they go to address a problem and use some level of motivation to try and make a change, I think the first barrier is that we have to reverse patterns of avoidance that we've probably been using for many, many, many years, if not decades. So if I can avoid making a decision about what to keep and what to discard, then I can avoid all the emotions that might come up with this. I can avoid all that concern about regret in my decision. I can avoid all the guilt I might have about contributing to a landfill if I throw something out. I can avoid all the guilt that might come up when I think about the money that I spent on this item or certain items. So I can avoid. So it's easier to walk away and avoid. And that's a human experience as well. We also know that sometimes people with this difficulty struggle with decision making. It's part of how our brains work, that some people find it easier to make decisions than others. And so if you find it a little bit harder to make a decision, then we can just avoid the problem and avoid putting our energy into making changes. And then we avoid having to even struggle to make a decision. So we go back into avoidance. We're also avoiding change. I've said it 2 times already. I'll say it again. Human beings don't always love change. There's very few people who relish change. They are out there, but they're not us. Well, maybe they are. I shouldn't say that. It's not me. And I'm going to guess that many of you are with me on the idea that it's really hard to engage in change. So if we don't make change and we put that motivation and energy elsewhere, then we don't have to deal with the distress and the uncertainty that comes up with the idea of making change. So I think that the biggest challenge to our motivation is the fact that we use avoidance a lot, and it's a pretty strong core feature of this difficulty. But what's the problem if we do that? And I'm guessing if we could open it up, which we won't, but just I'm going to say some thoughts on it in a moment, but just reflect for a moment that what are the problems that you've noticed with avoiding kind of going into the problem, or trying to kind of get in there and kind of make some sustained, meaningful changes in what you acquire or what you discard. So think about that for just a moment. And I wonder if some of you immediately thought of the fact that avoidance basically allows the problem to get a little bit bigger around you. This problem is really interesting because when we study other mental health difficulties, we see trends of either kind of like status quo or a bit of kind of waxing and waning depending on how stressful our life is. But with this difficulty, it tends to get worse over time. So as time goes, as we get older, it doesn't go away. It doesn't stay the same. It tends to get worse if we don't do something. So if we stick with avoidance and we don't use our motivation to kind of make some important changes, we are at really high risk of this problem getting bigger than it is. And that, I think, is a real struggle and a real concern for many of us. So I think if I say that plainly, avoidance doesn't work. It may feel a little more comfortable in the short term, but it tends to be associated with more problems in the long run. And I don't know about you, any of you, but when I avoid something or procrastinate something that's hard, what ends up happening inside my head is the problem. Either I have to pretend it doesn't exist, using sort of that kind of avoidance, or else I'm constantly stressed. But the problem can feel like even bigger and bigger inside my head, even more overwhelming, and then that saps more motivation. So we end up in a bit of a vicious cycle where we're avoiding, and then we get reminders, or somebody comes to our door and says, oh, our superintendent or fire, comes in, or our relatives come over, or someone says something that makes us remember that we're trying to forget the problem, but kind of brings us back into that moment again. And then we just feel more overwhelmed, and it's in our heads and we don't even know where to begin. And so it feels bigger and bigger, and then we're more apt to avoid. So all the motivation kind of goes out the window. So another fundamental, sort of truth that I like to accept, or try to accept, is the only way to get away from something is to go to something. So if I feel like I do have problems with, let's say, excessive clutter in certain areas of my home, it's not going to go away unless I go to it. And when I say go to it, that can be in lots of different ways, but obviously going to the act of having to make decisions, or having to try to get some help to support you if you want to do a little bit of discarding. The only way to get away from something that's problematic is actually to go to it. So if we avoid, the problem just exists and gets bigger and bigger. So we have to try to remind ourselves that we have to go to it, but in a really reasonable way. So let's get into some of those pieces as well. Related to this problem of avoidance is something else that we need to, I think, reflect on, which is that difficult emotions are part of the thing that we have to go to. So if we want to get away from feeling stressed and overwhelmed about things, we have to kind of go to it and go through them. And I like to think about, especially with anxiety, a lot of our decisions sort of provoke anxiety. And anxiety is not a dangerous emotion. It's just a really uncomfortable emotion. And there's nothing special that we need to do with our anxiety except to ride it like a wave. The more we fight anxiety, the worse it feels. So if I was feeling really anxious, let's say I was wanting to work on a goal of that safe spot to sleep, right? A really comfortable, nice, clear part of my bed That's a place that I can go every night and sleep. And I want to make sure that that's like free from items and possessions. I want to just have a nice, clear spot to sleep. And then I think about, that's my goal. And I need to do some things like move things, or sometimes even potentially discard things to keep that space clear. I'm going to have to go, to the anxiety of that and make some decisions or put some things in places, maybe different places, to create that safe spot for myself. And I need to go through the anxiety and I need to ride it. So even if I get more and more anxious, I just need to get through it. If I try to push the anxiety away, if I try to, suppress it or make it go away quickly, I'm probably going to end up feeling more stressed out, and it's going to feel even worse than it is. So it's uncomfortable. We don't love to feel sensations like anxiety and emotions like anxiety. But if we can find a way to ride them, and sometimes we can use strategies to ride the wave more comfortably. So if you've ever been taught strategies about breathing that are really helpful to you, or mindfulness strategies, or healthy, helpful grounding techniques to try to, bring you back to the present moment and not get too far ahead of yourselves with the distress or anxiety, great, use those. Those just help us ride the wave, but we kind of have to ride the wave. And for the next few minutes, I actually want to talk a little bit about mindset, because I also think that mindset is really important when it comes to harnessing motivation and gathering motivation. And so I'm going to talk for a moment about a study, some research. I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment, just so you can see my face a little bit, because many of you might have small screens and I like to connect a little bit. So I'll tell you about this study, because I don't have any other details on the slide. I wanted to just share this verbally. And so in some research, researchers were looking at kids who love reading. So this has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but I promise you, if you stick with me, it's relevant. So kids who loved reading, and then kind of taking a peek at how much they read and how much pleasure they got from reading. And they measured that, and they saw kids who loved reading, like they read a lot and they did take great pleasure from reading, and it was fantastic. And then they introduced a new variable. So they started giving these kids external rewards for reading. And that could be anything, right? So we often think of paying a kid for reading, or giving them money towards a treat for themselves. So anything like that. And what they found when they started giving these kids who love reading rewards for reading is that the kids read less and got less pleasure from their reading. So somehow we disrupted some lovely, normal motivation that those kids had. And we introduced this external thing, and all of a sudden, the kids started reading for the reward, which took away from their pleasure and doing it for sort of internal reasons, or sort of other reasons that were important to them as people, maybe. So you may say, Karen, why are you telling us about kids and reading when we're at a weekend conference to learn more about discarding and acquiring? And let me try to make a leap over. I think it's about motivation. And I think that one of the things that we often do in life is we start focusing on doing things, especially things that are hard, for the end goal. And we forget about the process. And then we start to only really reward ourselves in whatever way. Maybe we're not paying ourselves like we might pay, kids to read, but rewards come in different shapes and sizes. And a really important reward for most adults is a sense of competence, a sense of effort, a sense of of personal satisfaction. And so sometimes what happens, I think for us, and now let's get back to the problem at hand that we're talking about, is that we maybe start focusing on, or most people in our lives spend time focusing on only the results and not the process. So if our loved one hasn't visited us in a while and they come over and they see that we've kept a spot clear on a table, let's say at our kitchen table where we're going to eat, and they can see that, they may say, oh, great. And then all of a sudden you get praise and reward because you can see sort of an outcome. But what if you've done a lot of important things that just aren't as noticeable? Then are we getting, the reward for the effort and the time that you put in and the thoughtfulness and the emotional work that you've done, which nobody can see, but is actually probably the most important thing you can do, I would say. And maybe I'm biased as a cognitive behavioral therapist, so as a psychologist, but the emotional work is way more important than the physical work. And in cognitive behavioral therapy, there's a lot of time spent looking at doing exposure to discarding and practicing discarding so that we can go to the emotion and distress and through it instead of trying to stuff it down again. So rewards, and what are we rewarding, is the thing that I want to get all of us to sort of, think about today. So if I go back to my slides, let's think about how this could look if we really take this kind of idea about motivation seriously. And that, I think that the couple of takeaways that I have are to focus more on the process as the reward. So rewarding through whatever means is rewarding for you as a person, our effort, not just the outcome. And of course, I'm going to say, like, massive high fives, massive praise when there's an outcome that's important to you. But that needs to be your outcome, and it might not be something that I could see, but that's great. But I also think we should pay attention and reward the effort along the way and the emotional work that we're doing when we're putting in such effort. Another takeaway is that I think it's okay to invite and savor hard work. And I know from all the people that I've worked with and all the reading that I've done and the research that I've done on sort of traumatic histories and stressful life events for people who have hoarding difficulties, I know that that's hard to say because people have often been through an awful lot and have worked very hard already. And I'm going to say it anyways, that getting into a mindset of inviting and savoring some of that hard work, especially the hard emotional work, could help us sustain motivation. And that may be because it's that feedback to feeling like I'm doing something. I'm being very capable here. I'm working towards things that are important to me. And it may be hard, but I'm still doing it. I'm not using avoidance as much in my life. And so that can help kind of keep our motivation up. But if we just only focus on, I can only feel good when my bed is clear, then as a human, you're going to have setbacks and days where it's not clear. And you're going to have days where it is clear. And think about how nothing gets rewarded until it's clear. So we may have weeks and weeks and weeks where we've put hard work in and we're doing things that are really relevant to the overall goals of managing hoarding difficulties, but we may be sapping our motivation if we're not paying attention to the process of doing it. And I think another takeaway is about being mindful and staying in the moment. One of the things I've noticed with my clients and the people that I support is how easy it is to go backwards or forwards and not be in the moment. So we're backwards in thinking, but this was sentimental. This was my kids or my grandkids, or this was my deceased aunt's special thing. How could I ever not keep it? Or we're in the future, like, oh, if I get rid of that, I'll need it again. I'll regret it. I'll feel guilty about the fact that I put that thing in the garbage. And we're not in the moment. And I think that's part of what this idea of rewarding the effort, not the outcome, being okay with the fact that this is a process, being a little bit more mindful of the process, and then staying in the process. These are things that actually really help with motivation. And the opposite of these things are the things that sometimes sap our motivation. Okay. I do have a few more topics that I'd like to cover. And I'm really happy to come back if people want to talk about sort of that mindset and the process idea and the rewards idea. Happy to chat and hear your thoughts on that. But for the next little bit, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about this. This is a section that I developed with one of the groups that I was working with, where we did this as an exercise, and they were very happy for me to share the exercise with everybody here. And what we did is we talked about common barriers to change. So common barriers that we see a lot for people sort of struggling with this difficulty and trying to get their motivation up to make some changes. And then what they did, what they suggested to move around it. So I'm going to speak about this for a moment. And the first one is the one that's come up many, many times, which is getting started with whatever the task is too daunting. So when we talked about this in one of my my groups, I said, what are we going to do about this? And if any of you have ever been involved in any kind of a support group or a group therapy, we always know that it's much easier to give other people excellent advice than it is to follow our own advice. So we got them talking to each other, and they came up with a ton of really, I think, neat ideas, some of which may be more relevant than others, but I will share with you what they talked with each other about. And the first one is the idea of taking baby steps when you're going to make a change. So once again, that sort of streak of perfectionism that many people have, that wish that couldn't this just be finished and done already? So that over focus on the outcome rather than the process. And of course, if you're in legitimate, difficult circumstances where you're at risk of eviction, it's harder to take baby steps. I understand that. And so that drives our desire, like, let's just try to do a quick fix and get this taken care of in one, fell swoop. But for any of us who can take that step back, and it's not an urgent safety risk or eviction risk or something that requires a quick, what am I trying to say? A quick path forward. Trust me on the baby steps. You could, like human beings, can do many, many, many things if they just start at the beginning. But if you try to jump to the end, a lot of us can't. So you want to be very serious about knowing that, especially if you have a tendency, which most of us do, to overestimate our ability to do things. I'll just dump everything out of the closet and spend 2 hours and I'll get rid of half the stuff in that closet. No, you won't. Most of us can't do that. That's hard. So baby steps still matter, and they're much more realistic, and they are much more likely for us to then build some motivation, because if we take a baby step and we accomplish it, and then we are consistent with it, that's going to build some energy and build some motivation. So in line with the idea of baby steps is also sub goals. So it's great to have a goal. And then it's also great to break that down and say, okay, so if my ultimate goal is to have a clear spot to sleep, maybe I need sub goals, because maybe right now I can't reach my bed. Or maybe right now all the things on my bed don't have a home. So if I go to clear those off, and many of them are not things to be discarded, they're things to be, put in a different spot or put away, and I have no place to put them, then I might just go back to avoidance, and my motivation might go back down to like 0. So sub goals are important. What are all the things along that process towards, the eventual goal? And the eventual goal, hopefully is something like, a little bit of a safe or comfortable spot in your home that's just for you. My group members also said, ask for help when you need it. Sometimes we really are stuck and there's not appropriate help. inappropriate help is worse than no help. Because if you, let's say, employ the help of a family member who's very critical or doesn't really understand or is just tired and dealing with their own things and doesn't have a lot of patience, that might be actually harder for you than trying to go at a slower pace and doing it on your own. But there are lots of people out there that might provide really good help, even if it's, you know, a chat to give you a little bit of break on the phone. Or they may say, I can't do much, but I could come by and pick up if you have a bag that you want me to donate to the local thrift store. So asking for help, personal, professional, whatever's available to you. And then very similar to my thoughts about being in the moment and focusing on the process of what you're doing is to reflect on the benefits of doing what you're doing. So if you're going to make a change and you're going to do something hard, allow yourself to quite regularly remember why that's important to you. Some people are visual, and so you may have a picture or something visual that you can put up that reminds you of why you're doing this. So let's say it's a picture of your grandchildren because you'd like to have your grandkids over for a sleepover. Maybe they haven't been able to sleep over because they just haven't been enough space or it hasn't been safe enough. So maybe that's what you do. Or maybe you're not visual and it's a little bit more of a reflection that you like to do inside your head. But let's remember, to keep our motivation up, we have to think about why we're doing things, especially when they're challenging things. And the next one is not surprising, but rewarding your effort. So not the amount of time you spent doing something. We get over-focused on time in this world. Oh, why don't you do 20 minutes a day or half an hour a day? And that's great if you're actually doing the work that you meant to do. But oftentimes we're churning or we're, making decisions that maybe we made 2 weeks ago, but it's the same pile of stuff and it got built up again. Or we're just moving things around, but we're not actually discarding anything. And we really need to focus on discarding, but we're avoiding that emotion. So we would really want to focus not on the time, not on the number of bags that you get, out for discarding, not on, the end goal, but also but mostly I should say, thinking about the effort. Did I do what I know I need to do? So did I go through, did I face the whatever the emotion was in making a decision that's hard for me? And did I go through it and make the decision anyways? That's what we want to reward, whatever your effort is. And hey, at the same time, why not write your successes down? So give yourself a pat on the back for rewarding the effort, rewarding your successes. I did what I meant to do today. So yes, I have 5 more steps to go on that one little area, but I did what I said I was going to do. And then another one is to make a commitment to doing this. Sometimes out loud is better. So if you have a clutter buddy or a trusted friend or someone who's a great support to you, saying out loud, okay, here's my plan. Here's my goal. Saying it out loud and then, telling them that they're allowed to ask about it. Sometimes that can increase our motivation because we're like, ooh, I really want to be able to say, I did it most of the days, like not perfect because I'm human, but I did it, a lot. And so that can be really helpful to sustain our motivation. And once again, take me seriously about baby steps because they really matter. The next barrier that's very common, most people I've worked with have said this is true, is that a certain possession or an item or the act of acquiring gives me pleasure. And of course it does, because there's a multi-billion-dollar marketing and advertising industry that knows how to manipulate our brains and make us get pleasure because we're like, oh, I saved 20 cents on that can and, it's in a different color and we feel excited. Absolutely we do, right? Or some of us like collections, or some of us are very artistic and we like beautiful things. So of course, acquiring something beautiful gives you pleasure. That's the way the brain works. So what do we do about that? Well, we can't pretend it doesn't, and we can't change your brain because we all function in that way. But we can think about being really strategic. And so I have something when I talk to people about putting limits on acquiring, and you have the opportunity in this conference to do the non-acquiring field trip, which is a core skill and a wonderful thing to practice. In addition to things like that, I always talk about strategic acquiring. So if we think, oh yeah, I've got so much stuff, and we get really all or nothing about, our goals, and we think, yeah, I'm gonna stop acquiring anything, no more. Well, it's really hard to sustain motivation for that, because things are beautiful and we enjoy them, and don't we all deserve that sometimes? And so I really encourage this idea of strategic acquiring, which is thoughtful, planned, mindful acquiring here and there. So that is not going out every day to shop or going to the flea market every weekend. I know that's too high risk for most of us. That's like me if I went to, like, in Canada, we have something called Sephora, which is like Ulta Beauty or what, or a good drugstore. It's like, oh, look at all the neat lotions and the things that smell good. If I went, I would find something and it would be hard to walk away. I'd have to do non-acquiring field trips. But strategic acquiring is thinking, I think that it would be nice every whatever it is, maybe once a month or once every couple of months, I deserve something interesting, beautiful, delightful, whatever, with the only caveat being that it's planned, that you've made a thoughtful decision about it, you can afford it, you're going to use it right away, or you have a place for it. So it's very much not moving into a deprivation model where you're not allowed anymore, but actually saying, well, that's probably going to put me at higher risk of having a very large acquiring session, right? I've had clients who are like, nope, I just don't want to. And then they get, they have a tough moment and they find themselves online in the middle of the night and they buy 5 things that they didn't need, but they just felt so deprived for a long time. So we're trying to outsmart that. But we can also use core CBT principles like experiments. Test myself. So can I tolerate not having an item that I'm sort of, partially feeling like I have a duplicate, or haven't used it in a long time, or it's a little bit broken, and being able to test myself. Can I tolerate it for maybe longer and longer periods, so that you can gather some information about maybe I can live without it. And then another option that we can think about is finding other things that are pleasurable. So if lots of humans find pleasure in things, that's just, I think, very much a common, it's not universal, because there are people who are minimalists, but most of us find things pleasurable. But we may forget to fill our lives with other things that are pleasurable, and maybe not pleasurable in the way it's pleasurable to get something for 80% off, or something that's totally beautiful, or something you've been looking for a long time that's amazing, but pleasurable in the way that it still fills up our need for pleasure as people. So it could be a favorite hobby or activity. It could be sort of doing things with others more. It could be doing kind things for others. Whatever it is for each person, but make sure that our schedules have a lot of that in them, so that our brains are sort of lighting up with pleasure from multiple sources, not just from either acquiring or having an item. And as I mentioned before, anxiety and distress, we want to ride it like a wave because it actually has a shelf life. One of the things that we experiment in CBT, I always say, it's like finding out what's your shelf life of distress. Some people's shelf life is short. Some people have to sit it out a little longer, but it always has a shelf life. And if you think about other really intense emotions that are like peaking at a 90 or 100, typically about 20 minutes, and then they'll come down again. They won't necessarily go away, but the human body is not built to sustain 100 level of difficult emotions for long periods of time. That's not helpful to us. And so our bodies don't support that. Okay. I just have a few more things, and I'm mindful. I'm just looking that we want to have some time for questions. So let me move. I try not to talk too fast, but I'm also knowing that we need to have some time for questions. So this one is the physical challenge of moving items. And maybe this is the one where we can go a little quicker, asking for help or hiring help if that's feasible. My clients also said focusing on discarding small things because that still counts. Focus on limiting what's coming in because that still counts. And also using in my neighborhood here in Hamilton, in Canada, we have these really neat social media groups called Buy Nothings or Giving with Gratitude. And it's where if you put something outside you put something online, like on your, social media, that page, a gently used this or, half used, half-eaten box of crackers, but they're still good or whatever. And lots of times somebody else says, oh, I'll take that. I will use that. I have kids who love those crackers, and it's all within one's neighborhood. And that's great because you can usually just put it just outside the door or have someone knock on the door and then you give it to them. So it's not your responsibility to take it out. Using sort of things like furniture sliders, if you need to move large furniture and it's just you or you and a friend, we don't certainly want you to hurt yourself in doing things, but maybe you need to just reposition something so you can get at something else that you're working on. So sort of some creative ideas. Okay. The last couple of points are really about reasons to change and the importance of thinking about your personal reasons to change. And then in a moment, we're going to talk about linking that to your values as a person as well. So, Hannah, is that a question for the Q&A or something right now that I should address? You want to do Q&A later? Perfect. Okay, we'll come back to you. I'm looking forward to it. Oh.
Can you put it in the chat, Hannah? I'll be sure to.
I'm moving too fast. Okay. I gotta be mindful of not going too fast. I'm gonna leave this up for a moment then, and let's go through the reasons for change. These are reasons that people may give. Some of them are about our own feelings and our own state. It's okay if you're sick of feeling guilty or bad about yourself. Sometimes our reasons for change is because we just want everybody to leave us alone. Stop knocking on my door. Stop coming to do checks. Family, stop calling and asking, did you do that? Did you do that? Did you do that? So sometimes our reasons for change is we need a little peace from that. And that's fine. Sometimes our reasons for change, I already mentioned, is like wanting to have our grandkids over or a friend over or somebody who's going to repair something. Sometimes we might say, I struggle with this, but I know that I deserve a safe home. Some reasons to change might be financial. This is unfortunately a very expensive difficulty, not only just in the acquiring piece, but also because it's linked with, repairs that we have to get done. And sometimes things get broken because of the way things are stored. It's expensive. And sometimes it's our financial well-being that we're thinking about. That's a very reasonable reason that you might want to change. And sometimes it's for comfort. Like I want to sleep in my bed. Maybe I've been sleeping on my couch or, in a reclining chair, but my bed, I have a great bed. I just can't get to it right now. And many, many more. These are just a few examples. The thing that I think is important is not only identifying reasons for change. So thinking about your reasons, because everybody's got your own unique, but then also rating how important each one is to you. This may end up being something like a good sort of reflection for later. So maybe just sort of, get started with the idea. Write down, the first thing that comes to my mind about reasons for change, but then rate it. Now, why do you imagine, this is rhetorical, I'll tell you, but why do you imagine I want you to rate the reason? It's because sometimes the importance rating is low. If the importance rating is low, where's the motivation going to be for that? So if we think about, if you have very high ratings, you're in a good position. But if your ratings are low, it's going to be hard to find any motivation for that. And we need to bring in the idea of personal values. So when you think of any of your reasons for change, we're looking for a high importance rating. It's important to you, and it could be important to you and important to somebody else. Like you can say, it's important for me to have my superintendent never knock on the door again. That's okay. That might be very important because of your wellness and your sort of peace in your own home. So it has to have a high importance rating for you, not for your spouse or your best friend or your kids. You can take their perspectives in, but it has to have a high rating for you. And probably related to that, but really importantly, it has to link with your values. If any of us spent a little more time thinking about our own values, not what we think we should value, but what we actually do value, and we lived our life according to that, we would have much more motivation for the hard things. And when I talk about values, it's different for every person. I just put up a couple of examples here of the types of values that may be relevant for some of us. So I value family. Maybe I value my independence. I want to live on my own. Maybe I value thoughtfulness. I like to be a thoughtful person. Maybe I value intelligence, and so on and so forth. And so the idea of this is to think about, what do I value? Like, what is important to me? To not what should be important to me, what I think I should be valuing, but what actually is important? What are my values? And be honest with yourself about that, and make sure that your reasons for change are linked to your goals. Your reasons for change and your goals are all linked to your values. If we try to go in an uphill battle where we're attempting to do something hard, and I kind of laid out at the beginning of our talk today some of the things that are hard so that we could enter this as realistically as possible. I don't think I needed to say that. You guys are all wise to that. But I really wanted to just, underscore the idea that I understand, and I think we all need to respect that this is a hard process. But in thinking about motivation, we have to be very strategic. And this last piece is saying we need to be able to link these things back to our values, because that's where the best level of motivation exists. And I'm stopping there. And I know that,
Karen.
We have a little bit of time for questions, probably more
Yes.
questions than time, but we'll do our best.
I'll stop the